Hey everybody, welcome, and glad you're here. It's a beautiful day in Indianapolis, and we've got a few people signing in still, so we'll get started here in about a minute or so. This is a webinar, a Zoom webinar, not a Zoom meeting. So your cameras and microphones won't be used, just the presenters. Just so you know that, you're aware of that. Today's topic, the power of investing to change the world. There's ways in our lives where we can be an engine of blessing or sort of pay it forward to others, through your work, through your relationships, your time, obviously being generous, you can do that. But how can you do it through your investments? And that's what we'll talk about today. Jason is here with us from Eventide. He's one of the founders of Eventide, and a lot of my clients will notice that name, Eventide, on their statements. They're a mutual fund company, and I've worked with them for several years. And so I'm just glad to have him here today. And I believe we're ready to get started, Jason.
Great. Well, thanks, Tim, for the intro. Just want to say hello, everyone. Good to be with you, to spend some time with you. We're going to be talking about a topic that I really love. This is not a product pitch, I should say up front. This is educational. We're talking about the power that our investment choices have in shaping the world around us. I hope to illustrate that for you over this presentation. So a little bit about me before we jump in. I'm Jason. As you heard from Tim, I work with a company called Eventide. We're a mutual fund company headquartered in Boston. Our specialty is what's described as values-based investing. That means investing according to your values. And I'm an advocate of this. So I spend my days doing a lot of public speaking like this. I think I spoke at about 230 events last year on the topic. And with that, we will jump in. So when you're talking about changing the world, it's important to have a good working theory about how the world changes. And I want to borrow from someone that I think is an expert on this, James Davison Hunter, who is a sociologist from the University of Virginia. He heads up their Institute for Advanced Studies in Culture. He's written an excellent book entitled To Change the World for a popular audience about how the world changes. In this book, he argues that here in the States, we tend to put a lot of hope in these two parties, politicians and individuals. So the first one shouldn't surprise you, especially if you have like a Twitter account. You know how fraught and anxious people are about politics these days. A lot of people believe that politics is ultimately what shapes the world. Hunter says we way overestimate the power that politicians have. Additionally, he says we overestimate the power of just individuals. So here he means heroes from history. So if you think back in history, we've all got heroes. Maybe your hero is somebody like William Wilberforce, certainly a great man, but he didn't act alone. If you're a student of history and you've read the biography, you know there's many other forces that were at play. There were many other actors. It's never one person alone. History kind of remembers one person, but it's more complex than that. Well, how does the world change then if it's not these two groups? Here's what he says. This capacity to change the world is not evenly distributed in a society, but it is concentrated in certain institutions and certain leadership groups who have a lopsided access to the means of cultural production. Institutions, he argues, are very powerful in shaping our world today. So you can think, for example, about the institutions of Hollywood. You can think about Netflix, for example. You can think about the institutions of higher education. Think of Harvard. You can think about the institutions of media. Think of the New York Times. Some of these institutions hold incredible power. What I want to do is to borrow his theory here and look at investing through that institutional lens, to just look at how the movement of capital has shaped our world and how it still continues to shape our world today. So we're going to look back at history and then we'll apply it. All right, first historical example comes from this guy right here. Hopefully everyone remembers this picture from middle school. This is Christopher Columbus, who set sail on one of the most famous voyages of all time. We all know the story. He sailed the ocean blue and, discovered Central America. A lot of us, however, we don't know the investing side of the story. So what Columbus was wanting to do was to start a for-profit shipping business. And he had the novel idea that he was going to get to India, which was a popular destination for shipping, not by sailing around the Horn of Africa, but by sailing west. He had reason to believe that Japan was about 2,600 miles west of Europe. So he said, let me just sail west. Obviously, that was a bad idea, but that's what he believed. And so he needed capital. This was very expensive, very risky. So he had to go all over Europe seeking capital. And in his day, the only kind of people that had the kind of money that he needed were the rulers of society, kings and queens. So he started in Italy looking for investors, was turned down. He went to France, heard no. England, no. Spain, initially no, but he persisted and eventually got capital from Spain. And maybe you remember the story of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, who were the financial backers for his business. So he's got this capital and he sets off, and lo and behold, he doesn't find Japan. He finds Central America, and the rest is history. I want you to consider this story now that you know the investing piece, and just think about how consequential investing is. Let's say that he never found any investors, or that he wasn't a persistent guy and he gave up. What would history look like? But even that is a superficial reading. Have you ever wondered why Central America speaks Spanish, or why the major religion of that whole territory is Roman Catholic, or why the diet consists of things like tortillas? The answer is actually investors, because Spain was the financial backer of Columbus. He sailed under the Spanish flag, not the Italian flag, even though he himself was Italian. And as a result, he carried Spanish interests with him into the territory that he discovered. This is what determined the language of Central America, Spanish after Spain. That's why they speak it there. The religion, Roman Catholic. Guess what? Spain is Roman Catholic. Things like tortillas. We do not have to wonder why the diet looks like it does. Culturally speaking, Central America was very much like Spain as a result of this discovery. The seemingly small decisions about where we place capital are very powerful. I want to give you another example of this. This is a map of the trading routes of the British India Company in the red color here, and the Dutch East India Company in the yellow color. These were shipping companies, just like Columbus. Economic historians tell us that the world of modern investing was born out of the shipping industry, first with people like Columbus in the 1400s, then in the 1500s, especially in the 1600s with these two companies here. These two companies in particular mark the beginning of the modern corporation and the modern investing era. Now, what makes them modern? Well, they got the capital they needed, not by going to kings and queens like Columbus had done, but by taking advantage of a new invention, the stock and the bond. Brand new invention, never been done before. They issued stocks and bonds to ordinary investors to get the capital to fund their businesses. This was a financial experiment. In fact, we get the world's first stock exchange, which was established in Amsterdam, where people could trade these shares with one another to get their money back. Well, it was wildly successful. Let me tell you about the story of these two companies. So the British India Company was so powerful that India became a colony of Britain. Think about that. An entire country becoming a colony of another simply because of the power of a single corporation. This is the reason why, to this day, although almost no one knows this, the official language of India it's English. You can look that one up. How did that happen? It was the British India Company, the influence of this one company. And if you know about Indian history, the railroad, the university, political structures, culture. So much came from the power of this one company. Now, what about the Dutch East India Company? That's the yellow color. They got started in 1602. By 1634, they had grown in value to $8.2 trillion in today's dollars. You might say, wow, sounds impressive. How does that compare to big companies today? The largest company today, last I checked, was Apple at about 2 trillion. This company was 4 times as successful as Apple is today. And take a look at the yellow on the chart. They had a very limited geography. Do you think a company 4 times the size of Apple in that geography had an influence on the culture there? I mean, massive, right? Investing completely changed the world here. And now we can think about these investors. Were these investors trying to change the world? Now, I think they were trying to make money. Nevertheless, our decisions have this kind of world-changing impact. So investing is now often running in the 1600s. We've got stocks and bonds, and it was kind of a messy situation. One of the people that would talk about this is actually Daniel Defoe, who wrote Robinson Crusoe. I know many of us have had to read this book. Here's what he had to say about investing in his day. This is in 1697. Investing has raised the fancies of credulous people to such a height that merely on the shadow of expectation, they have formed companies. Let me pause here. What he's saying is the floodgates of capital have been opened by stocks and bonds, which have led credulous people, he's talking about entrepreneurs here, to form companies. So they go about choosing committees and officers, shares, bucks, and you can see here, raising great stocks. And then they go around and cry up an empty notion to that degree that people, investors, are betrayed to part with their money for shares in really a new nothing. And then it says, and when the inventors, meaning the entrepreneurs, have carried on the joke till they can't any longer, they sell their shares, leave the cloud to vanish of itself, and those poor investors to fight with one another. It says here at the end, the shares at first begin to fall by degrees. So the price is falling. Happy is he who sells in time, till like brass money, it will go at last for nothing at all. So here's what was happening. The stock and the bond were an amazing innovation for business. Why is that? Because large enterprises could get capital. They didn't have to go and try to get a meeting with a king, a magistrate. They didn't have to convince the aristocracy to give them money. They could issue stocks and bonds to ordinary people. A wonderful thing for business. As a result of this, however, it means that just about anybody could start a business, which is what he's describing here. You got all these entrepreneurs coming out of the woodwork with some harebrained idea. It's a bad idea. The thing is doomed to fail. So why are investors snapping up all these stocks and bonds if it's so risky? Because they saw the fortunes that were made by those first investors in the British India Company and Dutch East India Company, and everyone got dollar signs in their eyes, and they're throwing their money at every new issue that comes along. It's not unlike what I think is happening today with the cryptocurrency market, where all these new coins are coming out on the market. Everybody's looking to get rich. What was happening at the time is that people started to pay less and less attention to what the stock really represented, and simply were in it for the money. So we lost sight of the ownership a little bit. And a person was very disappointed about this, a man named John Wesley. John Wesley was a Christian English minister in the 1700s. He founded the Methodists, which is still a denomination of Christianity today. And just to get a sense of Wesley, this is probably his most famous quote. He said, "Do all the good you can by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as you ever can." Really great quote. So Wesley is observing the world of investing and how it's becoming disconnected from really moral discernment about what we're investing in. And he wanted to do something about it, but he's a pastor. So what does he do? He preaches a sermon to his congregation entitled "The Use of Money," 1759. Now, why am I mentioning this? This sermon is actually credited as the birthplace of socially responsible investing. Certainly faith-based investing, but secular historians agree socially responsible investing dates to 1759 with this sermon. So I want to just comment on what Wesley said, because I think it's still very relevant for us to consider today. He said this: "We are thirdly to gain all we can." So notice, even though he's a pastor, he's not saying that profits are bad. He says, hey, gain all we can. However, without hurting our neighbor. What's he saying there? He's saying that every investment is not just the profit. The investment is connected to a business that's having an impact in the lives of others, our neighbors in the world. And in pursuit of the profit, we need to also be attentive to how those profits are being made. We need to be knowledgeable about the situation we're stepping into. He says we can't, of course, harm our neighbor because we're supposed to love our neighbor as ourselves. Second great command, according to Jesus. We cannot, if we love everyone as ourselves, hurt anyone in his substance. He then goes on to describe very practically businesses and investments in his day that he felt like were harming neighbor. Here's one: pawnbroking. He says we can't invest in pawnbroking. It harms our neighbor. Doesn't matter if the profits are good. So a very practical sermon. And at the end, he lays down a principle, skipping ahead here, if you can see my mouse, the last couple sentences. I'm going to expound on him a bit for clarity since I skipped over some stuff. He said, if the profits we make through investing our business are coming from activities that profit the souls of men. So if those profits come from activities that are benefiting others, well, you're clear. Your employment's good, your gain is innocent. But if the profits come from activities that are harming neighbor, which is to say sinful in themselves, then it is to be feared you have a sad account to make. And lest we think he's mincing words here, he says, oh, beware, lest God say in that day, which is a reference to the final day of judgment when we give an account for our lives, this is what God may say: these have perished in their iniquity because of their investment decisions, but their blood do I require at thy hands. Wow, right? This is unbelievably strong language. We are not used to hearing it today. When's the last time you heard a Christian minister say that your very soul is at risk when making investment decisions? Clearly, he considered the moral consequences and the world-changing consequences of investing to be very, very important indeed. Okay, we're going to begin to move into the practical here. Just want to point out, we see companies like this, Google, Facebook, Twitter, Netflix. We acknowledge the impact they've had on the world. We forget that these companies exist only because of investors. Way back, there had to be those early venture capital investors. Then there was an initial public offering. Even today, our investments help these companies to succeed. There is an intimate connection between our investing decisions and the way that the world changes. And hopefully this is becoming clear. I want to give you one last example from history. I love this one. I think this is just such an incredible story. It comes from 1971. Many of you were around. I was not, but thankfully we have historians and I have read them. There was something going on in South Africa in that day called apartheid. Now, in case you're fuzzy on this, I'll give you a refresher. This word apartheid, it's kind of a weird word. It comes from a language in South Africa, from the Afrikaans. It means separation. Okay, so you can translate it literally as aparthood, to keep apart, to keep separate. This word described institutionalized racial segregation. This was not just a racism of the heart. It was acted out. The Black community was kept separate from the white community and treated in a very inferior manner. The world was very concerned about this, including, as you'll see, a group of Christians in the US. Now, before mentioning what they did, I wanted to point out why politics is sometimes powerless. The South African government was ignoring United Nations sanctions and embargoes. All these world powers are coming together, putting fines, embargoes, sanctions on South Africa. South Africa is like, who cares? Really? I mean, what's this going to do? So how do you change it? Investing. A group of Episcopal shareholders were looking at their investments, and they realized that they were investing in General Motors, the big automotive company. And General Motors had operations in South Africa, operations that had racial segregation. They kind of put it together. They said, wait a minute, we don't want to be involved in this. We hate this, but we're investors. And so we've got some power here. What if we as investors express our concern to General Motors and ask them to change their ways? That's what they did. So they filed what's called a shareholder resolution, the first time this had ever been done, which is now a very common practice. So it's basically a letter that you write to the company. And to write this letter, they got some help. They enlisted the help of Leon Sullivan, this man here. You can see he was a black man. He was from Philadelphia. He was a Baptist minister, someone who cared about the cause of ending apartheid. And working with these Episcopals, Leon Sullivan helped them formulate what they later called the Sullivan Principles. It was a set of proposals for GM. It was things like, hey, you have to have equal pay for equal work. You've got to have the same working conditions for blacks and whites. You've got to integrate your bathrooms and your water fountains instead of having black and white facilities. So things like that. They put it in a letter, they mail it off with a prayer, I'm sure. And General Motors gets this letter, they decide to do it. And in fact, they bring Leon Sullivan, this Baptist minister, onto the board of what was then one of the most powerful companies in the world to help them implement this and give them guidance. Shortly thereafter, Ford and Goodyear also followed suit. They had operations in South Africa as well. They basically did a copycat of adopting these principles, and companies began to adopt them one by one by one. And it catalyzes change within South Africa when nothing else had worked. In fact, history remembers that one of the key instruments, if not the key instrument, in the fall of apartheid was investor pressure. By the way, these Episcopals had 0.006% of the outstanding shares in GM. This was not some financial takeover forcing their will. This was just faithfulness in action. And I think an amazing example for all of us to consider and seek to emulate. All right, so how do we do this? How do we begin to be intentional with our investing in order to be intentional about the way in which we're shaping the world? First, got to be intentional. If you invest in just the status quo, traditional investing approach, you're capitalizing the status quo. World goes on like it does today. And so we got to think about what we want to accomplish. Second, we got to work together. This is bigger than any one person. Doesn't necessarily take institutions, but we've got to think collaboratively. And we need tools. We need ways to put all this into practice. I believe my company, Eventide, is one of these, but there are many. It takes webinars like this to raise awareness, financial advisors like Tim. Now, how can we be intentional? There are three basic ways. First, avoid. You can choose to avoid investing in companies that have problems. This is the essence of what John Wesley was talking about, refusing to profit off of activities that harm our neighbor. It might be investments in the tobacco industry or casinos, things like that. This is a pretty well-defined practice. Second, embrace. We can strategically seek to direct our dollars toward companies that are doing good things in the world. I'm going to give you some examples of that. Finally, if you're an investor, you can always engage the companies you own, just like the Episcopals did with General Motors in the apartheid example. When you're an investor, you're an owner, and the board has to listen to you. So kind of a bit of a laborious process, but always at your disposal. All right, what I want to do here at the close is I want to just give you some good things that I see happening in the investing world, just to kind of cultivate your imagination about what would be possible with our investing intentionality. Okay, first one I want to talk about is clean energy. Maybe you've heard a lot about this. I want to give you a different view on it. Here are some headlines from India. Okay, so India's pollution today is as deadly as the black smog that covered Britain during the Industrial Revolution. New Delhi's gas chamber smog is so bad that United Airlines has just stopped flying there. Look at this one. Breathing in Delhi air is equivalent to smoking 44 cigarettes per day. I don't know if you are a world traveler. and have been to some of the big cities of India, if you have, this is not at all surprising. I'm going to show you some pictures. Here's New Delhi. This is smog. It's not fog. It completely blacks out our view of creation. This is the famous India Gate in New Delhi. Here's Beijing, China. This is actually the same picture left and right. You can see the red sign. On the left, a heavy rain's just come through, temporarily washing away the smog. On the right's what it looks like on a typical day. This is just an amazing reality. Beijing's one of the worst places in the world. Here's another from Beijing. This is the Forbidden City. Beijing, not at night or early morning. Here in the foreground, you can see people wearing face masks. Very familiar sight. But look at the date, 2013. This is not COVID. There's nothing looming in the air. There's no airborne viruses. These people are not trying to stay healthy from a virus. They're trying to breathe cleaner air. It's very, very common for people of all ages, from children to the elderly, to wear a mask outside. It is their daily reality. One more from Beijing. This kind of pollution, which you can actually see with your eyes, accounts for 16% of all premature deaths worldwide. It's about 9 million souls lost per year. It exceeds deaths due to tobacco smoking, road fatalities, drug overdoses, war and murder. So every kind of violence. Here's the same data, but I think it's very helpfully displayed. And maybe this will be helpful to you. So first, what they're showing are the types of pollution. So we're talking about air, which is the blue color. Then what they do is they break down the impacts by the wealth of nations. So you can see low-income countries, lower middle, upper middle, and high-income countries. Now, where are we? We are right here. And as you can see, we have the lowest incidence of issue in the world. You walk outside, you take a deep breath, you say it's a beautiful day, and it is. But I think one of the mistakes that we can make is assuming that everyone, when they walk out their front door, has the same experience. In places like India and China, which are the lower middle income countries, it is simply not the case. They are right now going through their industrial revolution, but with a lot more people and a lot more engines. And so the pollution there is just a real problem. How could we address it? Clean energy. I want to read you a quote here. I'd put my money on the sun and solar energy. What a source of power. I hope we don't have to wait until oil and coal run out before we tackle that. I wish I had more years left. I did not attribute this quote because I usually like to ask audiences to guess who said it. And when I'm in live settings where people can talk back to me, I always hear things like, oh, is this Bernie Sanders? Is this Elon Musk? Is this Al Gore? It's always some contemporary figure. This was Thomas Edison, all right, back in 1931. What we're doing today with clean energy has been a dream of brilliant inventors for a very long time. And I know that clean energy has become this kind of hot button political issue for many. I think we should think about it like Edison, just as a brilliant invention. It is the way that history is going, and it's a smart thing to adopt. I mean, we can take the power of the sun, convert it into energy for civilization without the pollution, or without as much of the pollution. So just something I think that hopefully I can make a small shift in your perspective on. Imagine what would be possible in India. On the right, this is what it looked like at that India Gate during the early days of COVID, when they paused economic activity for just a moment. Beautiful blue skies. And we are able to actually create a different world for people to live in. And it's just such an exciting proposition, and something that's just so fundamental to human stewardship responsibility in ruling over creation. All right, let me give you another one here. Water technology. More than 2,000 children die every day from water-related illnesses. You almost never hear about this. I'm going to give you some stats on water, but here's the definition of what it means to have access to water. Maybe you've heard that before, someone having access. We all have access, of course, but what does that mean? Having access to water means that there's a source of water within 1 kilometer of your home where you are able to obtain at least 20 liters of drinking water for each person in your house. Okay. Now, we're not on the metric system. So how much is 20 liters? If you took a shower today and you're a typical American, which you probably are, you used 65 liters of water. Okay. So 20 liters is tiny, way less than we use. And you can see this drinking water they're describing, it's not just for showering, it's for everything. So all domestic purposes. Now, with this as a backdrop, here are some stats on the problem of water today. About 1 million people die each year from diarrhea. You don't hear this hitting the news very often. 80% are children under age 5. In fact, dirty water is the second largest killer of children in the world today, right behind pneumonia. By 2025, how many people will not have access? That's that definition we looked at. 800 million people. It's a very, very big number. And it's right around the corner. 133 million people have worms in their stomach. One half of the world's schools don't have water. And they don't even have a source of water within a kilometer. $1 spent on water is estimated to have an almost $26 return. Now, this is not like a stock return. This is the return that comes from when you add up what the world gets. Okay, so why is this the case? Because people aren't sick. They're not on the toilet. They're not missing work. They're not in the hospital. The healthcare system is less burdened. That person's out contributing economically. If you add all that stuff up, you get a very big return. This is my colleague, Finney, here in Uganda with 3 of his boys. And he goes there each year. While he's there, he tries to meet a practical need. So before becoming an investor, he was a medical doctor in Boston, and he conducts what's called a deworming clinic. That's why these people are lined up. The lines go on all day. There's no way he could see everybody. Basically, everybody that lives in Uganda has this critter living in their gut. This is Bilharzia. It's a worm. You get it from drinking contaminated water. It's treatable, fortunately. But if you think about it, this is a very temporary relief that he's providing because people are going home where they're going to drink contaminated water, which is where they get the worm in the first place. So we have to think about root causes. In most of the world, water is considered women's work. Some pictures from Somalia and Mumbai here about where people get their water from. It's just crazy. The reason it's important to mention women here is that this is one of the main reasons why women lag behind men in education globally. It's because women are tasked with getting water, including the daughters of families. And so they have to skip school. And the whole thing is just it completely limits their time and ability to get an education. Parts of the world are reaching crisis levels. This is a well in Gujarat, India. You can see how arid the climate is. Lots of people, very limited water. And so fights break out. These are 2 women in Pune fighting over water. Here's a quote. "We face acute shortages of water, but water is available only 2 to 3 hours a day. Frequent fights. Need to walk 20 to 30 minutes to fetch water. It's so humiliating." Massive problem. Investing would be a great way for us to address this. Where is the water in the world, and how do we deal with this? Well, most of it's in the ocean, as I'm sure everyone knows, 96.5%. That leaves a little sliver of fresh water. If you were to zoom in on this fresh water and blow it up, most of the fresh water is frozen in glaciers and ice caps. Almost all the rest is underground. That leaves a little tiny sliver of surface water. Okay, let's zoom in on that. Most of that is in ice and snow. Finally, you get to rivers and lakes. The point of this chart is to show us rivers and lakes, that is not going to be the way in which we meet the world's water needs with a growing population. Nor do I think it's supposed to be. We're actually tasked with developing the earth, being innovative. And so the easiest way to be innovative would be to access groundwater through ordinary filtration systems, which we know about, and investment in that kind of basic technology. We could begin to address this problem. In fact, experts in the world of water say we could fix the entire world's water needs in 1 year. They say all it would take is the heart to do it and investment capital. So at my company, we wanted to be a part of this. We invested in a publicly traded company available to anyone that was working on this problem. 25% of their business comes from the developing world, where they're the leader. And this is off their website. They have a 2025 goal to provide clean water to at least 20 million people living at the very base of the global economic pyramid, the poorest of the poor. This is not a charity. It's a for-profit business. Pretty amazing to see. This is pretty rare, but exciting, right? And I don't know if you've ever donated to charities addressing water, but look at the scale on this, 20 million people. This is way bigger than digging wells in Kenya through some water ministry. Now, in addition to that, the company does a lot of donating. So they've given away $25 million since 2010 to clean water projects, which again, the scale of that gift is just massive. So really excellent example here of how business is serving the world as it should. And we can invest to make possible that value creation in the world while receiving an investment return, which allows us to reinvest in other projects. So this is a great example of what's possible. Last one here, this will be brief. Unmet need in healthcare in the area of the central nervous system. So have you any knowledge of the disease schizophrenia? We've all heard of it, right? What is it? Here's what it is. It's a set of symptoms. This is the reason why people struggle to remember it. It's just a bit of information here. There are positive symptoms and negative symptoms. The big ones are delusions and hallucinations. People report they see things and hear things that are not really there. They have disorganized speech, hard to understand them. On the negative side, they have what's called a flat affect, which means their emotional range is very compressed, reduced speech, and they lack initiative. They struggle to get motivated. Have you ever encountered schizophrenia? Do you know someone? Every once in a while, somebody will say, yeah, I think I had a friend whose daughter had that. It was very sad. A lot of us forget the obvious, which is this is a vast problem among the homeless population. Schizophrenia is one of the main drivers for homelessness. In fact, as I walk around the streets of Boston, if I'm honest, I'll encounter many people on the street where I would be tempted to say, oh, this person's crazy. Well, what is that quote crazy? Formal diagnosis is often schizophrenia, right? They have disorganized speech, they're seeing things, they're delusional, they lack initiative. So this is a big problem. It affects a lot of people, about 3 million Americans, which is about 1% of the population. The treatments we have are terrible. So the last FDA approved treatment was the year 1952, very old in medical years. And as you can imagine, it's a terrible medicine. It was invented in 1952. The World Health Organization ranks it as the third most debilitating disease in the world. Business here again and investing, as you can predict, is what I'm going to say. How many cups of hot chocolate and warm blankets would be equivalent to actually addressing this disease, which is a driver for homelessness? We have been interested in watching this space very closely. We do a lot of healthcare investing. It's been a space where there hasn't been a lot of innovation, but recently there was a company that we came across that was working on a new therapy. And after doing our research, we invested in this company. And I want to share with you their phase 2 clinical trial because I think it's very encouraging and exciting. So what they did is they took a group of patients that had schizophrenia and they divide them up into 2 equal groups. One group got a placebo, that's your control group. The other group got this drug that they had developed. They admitted everyone into the hospital and they monitored the symptoms that I showed you here in the hospital for 5 weeks. So here are the results. I'll tell you how to read this. On the x-axis is just the length of stay in the hospital. As I said, 5 weeks. Baseline is day 0. The vertical axis here, it looks very scary, but it's really simple. If you see this PANSS, what that stands for is positive and negative symptoms score, PANSS. So they're just wanting to see these symptoms get better, which is why it starts at 0 and goes negative. You want to see the symptoms go down, obviously. The black dotted line shows you what happened to the group that was getting the placebo, which is to say nothing. They got about 5 points better, which maybe seems odd to you, but it's such a debilitating disease. Just being in a hospital where you have nurse care and regular meals and doctor attention, you get a little bit better. So this was predicted. But look at what happened with the drug. They saw an almost 20-point reduction in this PANSS score, which clinicians told us is a complete game changer. This would absolutely change someone's life. So this is really encouraging, right? Now, this is phase 2. So there's one more phase they'd have to go through before the FDA could approve it for the population. We're very hopeful based on the strength of this data. This is a very well done study. The asterisks here indicate how statistically valid they are. So we're hopeful. We're investors here, so we're hoping to, of course, generate a good return for our investors. But I don't share it with you for its profit-making potential. I share it with you because of its world-changing potential. We often, as investors, we fail to recognize the way in which our investments are causing things to happen in the world. And our tagline at my company is investing that makes the world rejoice, because we want to remember that investing should be about capitalizing, rejoicing, and blessing in the world, not simply as a way to save up for retirement. I'll leave you with this final slide here. This is from the sociologist I opened up with. Most of us are inclined to what's been called the great man or the great person view of history, that the history of the world is but the biography of great men. The only problem with this perspective is that it's mostly wrong. Against the great man view of history and culture, I would argue, along with many others, that the key actor in history is not the individual genius, but rather the network. Maybe you're just an ordinary person who has a desire to change the world, but you say to yourself, I'm no genius. Who am I? I'm just an ordinary guy. Well, good news is history doesn't tend to change through individual geniuses, but through a lot of people working together in network. And that's the institutional power. When we work together with others, our capital all of a sudden has great power to shape the world around us. And so if this sounds like you, well, Tim can help. So set up a meeting with him to talk more about how you could incorporate this into your own investments. And I'm going to bring him back on to shepherd us through the remainder of our time.
Thanks, Jason. That's good. I'm motivated. Go team. That's like a halftime talk there. Really appreciate that. And returns are a part of it too, though, right? I mean,
Sure.
Folks do want to retire and things like that. And I've seen studies, a portfolio like this versus a typical portfolio, and returns are about the same, maybe underperform or overperform a little bit at different periods in time, but roughly the same. Have you found that to be true?
Yeah, that's right. So there's a way in which you could go about what's called impact investing, where you set aside the return part and you're just going for the world change part. We don't approach it that way. So we want to be able to make as compelling a financial case as an impact case. We want both of those to be there. And so I could take you through those same 3 things, water technology, clean energy, and the schizophrenia example, and make the financial argument. I obviously left that out. But we like to see both there. And so we're not trying to take a lower return or a concessionary return in order to accomplish this impact. Although, each of these firms that you might encounter might do it a little bit different, but that's how we approach it.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. So we can do good and still do well with our portfolios and investing. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. My contact info is on there. If you have any questions on anything, please feel free to contact my office. And Jason, thanks again.
My pleasure.
Have a great
Thanks,
day,
everyone.
everybody.